Okay, now let's start looking at architecture of South Asia. We focus on India, but look at a few other sites like the famous Angkor Wat in Cambodia and Borobudur in Indonesia. South Asia, the Indian subcontinent, is located in between the Himalayan mountain and the Indian Ocean, right? And the ancient civilization also originate from two great rivers, the Indus River and the Ganges River. These are two big rivers. Civilization first appear along the Indus River, and then the cultural center moved to the Ganges River. These two great rivers. Here, the cultural center, most of the sites are subtropical or even tropical, right? So it's warm. So that's the first thing we need to understand. Their climate, their natural environment. It never gets very cold, which is significant because a lot of ritual activity can be happening exterior, and architecture perform a very different function than those cold area like in Rome or in North China. And secondly, kind of like Egypt, the season was there was no clear 4-season division. In Egypt, there was a dry season and there was a flooding season. And in India, there was the monsoon season and there was the dry season. Right? So here, it's also like just 2 seasons instead of clear-cut spring, summer, autumn, and winter. So basically, from June to September, the monsoon season, where heavy rain was the norm, very wet. And then the rest of the year is dry, perched climate, very sunshine, and very strong sunshine. So that hot climate facilitate intensive use of outdoor spaces. The Himalayan mountains screening the north is almost like the sky, insurpassable for the ancient people. And the looming snow mountains looks like the domain of gods. And indeed, they were imagined as the abodes of gods, just like the Mount Olympus for the Greek world. Those Himalayan snow-covered mountain range, and especially those great peaks, were imagined as the world of the gods. Compared to Mount Meru, an imagined axis of the universe for the Indian cosmology, like the Ganges mountain. So in India, the universe was imagined of revolving along a central axis. So there were different layers of surface on which different people, different beings live. And those snow mountains certainly provide a metaphor for that axis of the universe. There was before the construction of monumental structures under the sponsorship of Buddhism, there was a Vedic period, and that Vedic period was like the Dark Age, archaeological Dark Age in Indian history, which is somewhere between 1500 BCE to 600 BCE. During that period, there were not much material culture uncovered from that. But that period, like the Homeric Greece, created great legend, great great epics like the Mahabharata, etc. And from those literature, we know the Vedic period India, there was the caste system, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. These are the four castes from top to bottom. And they usually also were professionally related. And then there are the slave-like underclass known as the untouchables. So there was a long history of venerating priests above kings, kind of like early Mesopotamian civilization. In India, throughout its history, great spiritual leaders were considered as, enjoying a higher social prestige than the secular rulers of kings and warriors, which belong to the secondary caste of Kshatriyas, while the Brahmins that produce scholars, priests, and teachers, religious leaders, that was considered as the highest social class. So that religion before the birth of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism was collectively referred to as Brahmanism because their spiritual leaders were Brahmas. And then in the 6th century BCE, a series of religious reform happened that produced those great religion of Buddhism, which eventually became Pan-Asian. It spread to China, spread to Japan, spread to Mongolia, all over the world, and Southeast Asia. Buddhism, for example, claim all beings are equal. So that is certainly a statement against the caste system in Brahmanism. And Jainism made a similar claim. And these reforms somehow forced Brahmanism, pre-Buddhist Brahmanism, to change, to reform, and eventually became known as Hinduism today. So Hinduism could be considered as a reformed Brahmanism. So today, the three great religions originated from the Indian soil are Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism. But the most popular one today is in India is the Hinduism, next to Islam. So Islam is also today very significant in India and Pakistan, which used to be the same, kind of belong to the same British colonial governance. But after the colonial period, the two countries separated into a Muslim Pakistan and a Hindu India. But both populations in countries today. So there are still many Muslim living in India. So the first great religion creating monumental architecture is Buddhism. Buddhism, founded probably somewhere around 600 BCE, in the 6th century BCE, was one challenging the authority of Brahmanism. It was royally sponsored until the 3rd century BCE. Kind of similar to Confucius. Confucius lived in the 5th century BCE, but Confucianism did not became a national ritual system until the Han Dynasty, which is the 3rd century BCE as well. Buddhism kind of experienced very similar phenomena. So is Christianity. Jesus Christ lived in the 1st century, but Christianity was not legalized until the 4th CE. So it seems that it takes a couple centuries for a great religion to be institutionalized, to be organized into an influential network. So Buddhism was highly sponsored during the Maurya dynasty. The Maurya dynasty from 322 to 185 BCE, founded by King Chandragupta Maurya, but it was the, Maurya was a contemporary to Alexander the Great. It was said that the two person met when Maurya was still a teenager. He saw Alexander and he admired him, and he eventually followed Alexander's example to conquer much of India and founded a huge empire known as the Maurya dynasty. Its capital is located at Pataliputra along the Ganges River. Here we have the Ganges River, there we have the Indus River, and Pataliputra, which is here, also known as Patna. There, Buddhism flourished under the third Mauryan king, Ashoka. Ashoka was a 3rd century BCE king of the Maurya dynasty. And during Ashoka's reign, Buddhism was sponsored by the royal power, and missionaries were sent out to all over India and abroad. So Buddhist community established throughout India. And let's take a look at an early site called Sanchi. Sanchi is not at the heartland of Buddhism. The heartland of Buddhism is in this area, just in the lower Ganges River area, where those sacred sites for the birthplace, the death place of Buddha, and the place where he performed his first sermon and his Enlightenment location. All those sacred Buddhist sites are located here. Sanchi rather is in the marginal region of that Buddhist heartland. Yet here, an early Buddhist site was very well preserved. 3 types of Buddhist architecture, very important. Stupa, which is this guy, is a Buddhist tomb. But it is not a tomb in our common, funeral culture. Because according to Buddhism, no one actually died. Everyone had, numerous lives, rebirth, death and rebirth, death and rebirth. So reincarnation, that's a key belief in Buddhism. So, this life end, and then the true self will be reincarnated into the next life. So according to Buddhism, the death as we conceive it's just an illusion. It's like you just change a clothes. So stupa was not constructed for that. Just a common guy died, and it's not worth to be honored with a stupa. So according to Buddhism, the true end of this reincarnation, because first Buddhism consider this reincarnation as bad. There's nothing enjoyable for this numerous lives and birth. It's all painful, right? It's all pain. The birth is pain. Getting old is painful. Getting sick is painful, and dying is also painful. And then being reborn is just to start another cycle of misery. So the whole purpose for practicing Buddhism is to end this cycle of rebirth, endless rebirth. And when someone ended the reincarnation and enter the Buddha world. Buddhists call that enlightenment, and they also call that Nirvana. All right, Nirvana is the Indian term of true bodily death. That means, you know, the true self is no longer being reincarnated into a physical body anymore. It became enlightened. It belonged to a better world, the Buddha's world, being it the paradise or, you know, pure land. Is depend on kind of different school of Buddhism, but that is Nirvana. And Stupa was constructed to bury the remains for those people who achieved Nirvana, which means they are not going to be reborn into a physical human or animal form anymore. So it's a tomb, yes, but it is not a tomb as we understand. It is a structure to honor enlightenment, to honor of kind of ceaseless, painful death and rebirth, and it is a structure to honor Nirvana. So that's Stupa. So how do we know who achieved Nirvana? Well, according to Buddhism, if someone ended this cycle and the cremation of the body would create those shining jewel-like substance, and that is called the Buddhist relics, right? According to Buddhist sutras, the cremation of Shakyamuni Buddha created as many as 84,000 pieces of jewel, and those were dispersed to every corner of the world to be honored with a stupa. All right, so in early Buddhist society, the construction of stupa is usually to honor the reception of a original Buddhist relics from the cremation of Buddha. So that is stupa, right? It's a symbol of enlightenment, even though it has this kind of tomb-like look. Another type of Buddhist architecture is called Chaitia. Chaitia Hall is a elongated hall that looks rather like a basilica. It has a central aisle with tall ceiling, a central nave, and a side with lower ceiling. And it also has a target. It has axiality. It has an end, an apse like semicircular ending space. And there, usually a carved model of stupa is put there to be worshipped as the symbol of enlightenment, and people circumambulate that relics monument. So this is basically interior worshiping space. That's called Chaitia. And a third type is called a Vihara. Vihara is basically Buddhist dorm. It's the dormitory for the practitioners, for the monks and the community. Usually, and very often in the courtyard, there's a shrine or there's a worshiping space and small rooms surrounding the courtyard to provide sleeping chambers, sleeping bedrooms for each individual practitioner, and also for meditation, singular and meditation in those spaces as well. So three types: stupa, chaitia, and vihara. And early Buddhist monuments or community also often has Ashoka columns. These are Ashoka columns. Ashoka column is a pure monument. It's not supporting anything. Let's first take a look at Ashoka column. This is a Ashoka column. It's established by King Ashoka. Inscriptions carved on the shaft, praising Buddhism and calling upon everyone to convert to Buddhism. On the top, usually there's an animal sculpture, lion bull, horse. These are the common subject for the capital. And underneath, there's a lotus flower and a lotus that die every winter and flourish every summer seems a good metaphor for reincarnation and rebirth for the cycle of life. So it's a Buddhist symbol. The lotus flower, the wheel as well, is another Buddhist symbol. It is referred to as the wheel of Dharma, and the Dharma means law. And in Buddhism, law can be translated as universal principle. So everything, the cosmic principle, that is called law. It's not just a legal. It's not just a legal term. So the wheel of Dharma. The most famous Ashoka capital for Ashoka column is the Lion capital. This one, right? It's a Buddhist monument. Originally, it was raised on high in the air above a column like that. Today, it became the symbol of India, and it appeared in currency. Originally, it was a Buddhist monument, Buddhist relics. The drum has the wheel of Dharma, and the transition from the capital to the shaft was made by the lotus petal. And the lion was a symbol of Buddha. It was said Buddha's awakening power is like the roaring of a lion. So it symbolized royalty. It also symbolized the enlightening power of Buddhist teaching. Well, all these were given, local, temporal, religious significance. However, one can hardly fail to recognize the similarity between the Ashoka column, the lion capital, and the Achaemenid, Iranian Achaemenid Persian monument that we have studied in the Mesopotamian lecture. We looked at Persepolis. We know in Persepolis, there are capitals with animal figures carved. Bull, lion, and horse are also quite popular. But at Persepolis, those capitals were supporting roofs, right? They have the kind of the V-shaped indent to receive the wooden beams and rafters. I think it's quite highly likely that the Maurya dynasty India was influenced architecturally from Persia, from the Achaemenid Persia, Persepolis, for example, because stylistically, this animal capital looks very similar to those Persian types. Although in this case, it's not part of the architecture, only taking the monumental appearance of those columns. By the time of Ashoka, Persepolis, for example, was already destroyed by Alexander the Great, and it became ruins. So probably what they see back then was just those freestanding columns with the roofs collapsed, and copied that to honor their new religion. That is a possibility, especially given the stylistic similarity between the Ashokan sculpture and the Persepolis sculptures. So stupa, there are a few stupas. Some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller. The biggest one, known as stupa number 1, was constructed during the Maurya period and later repaired during the Shunga period. And much of the sculptural carving were from the Andhra period, which was from the 1st century BCE to 1st century CE. But the core and the spatial arrangement was from the Maurya dynasty. So we look at it as an example of Maurya architecture. In the 19th century, when the British archaeologists, supported by the colonial British government, came to the site to restore it, they found everything, buried under dirt and collapsed. So enormous effort were made to find the pieces and put them together to restore this monument. So this is after restoration, obviously, the Great Stupa at Sanchi. It has a 3-section division, a top part, a middle part, and a lower part. The top part features a square railing fence and with an axis of a pillar in the middle, and then 3 umbrellas. This is a model of the Indian cosmic order. The axis represents Mount Melu, the axis of the universe, and the 3 discs represent the 3 realms on which different sentient beings are living. So according to Buddhist cosmology, the upper and middle realms were occupied by God and the demigod, and then the lower realms were occupied by human being and animal figure, as well as the lowest layers are occupied by ghosts and all kind of demons, etc. So that's the Buddhist cosmology, and it seems that the 3 umbrella and the axis is a perfect summarization of that cosmology. The middle part is just a hemispherical mound. It's solid. There's no interior space, right? So the surface is using stone to create a nice surface, but it is filled with dirt, earth. And then the lower part has a circular railing with the 4 cardinal direction marked by these gate. The gate are known as the Torana on 4 cardinal direction. And then the defining a circumambulation path surrounding the base of the stupa. And then in the transition between the lower layer and the middle layer, there is another railing that allow people to circumambulate the center on a second level, while the highest level, the railing, is not meant to be accessed. So that's the kind of imagined upper world. So the stupa itself could also be understood as a metaphor for the universal structure of a lower realm, a middle realm, and the upper realm. And then the axis itself is a summarization of that tripartite division of the universe. So this one shows it better, right? The lower railing, circular, the middle railing, circular, the upper railing, square, the axis, 3 umbrellas, right? Here, I wanted to talk a little about how physical environment regulate people's behavior, people's action. There's a little curve once you enter this plan. Once you enter the space, right? You do not have direct access to that circumambulation. Take a left turn because the entrance is here. And when you are forced to turn left, if you continue that motion, you find yourself circumambulating clockwise. You will feel unnatural to make a right turn here to circumambulate it counterclockwise. And all the gates are designed that way. Make left turn, clockwise ambulation. Make left turn, clockwise. Make left turn, clockwise circumambulation. Buddhist ritual require always circumambulate a sacred center, being it the relics of Buddha or a statue of Buddha. You always do it clockwise. You don't want to do it counterclockwise. That is anti-Buddhist convention. So the physical structure, the spatial design was made that way to make that ritual movement, to regulate that. And there are stairs that allowing you to access the middle railing and circumambulate it on a higher ground. You know, in terms of art and sculpture, there are a lot of rich material, but this is not an art history class, so we don't want to spend time on that. I want to point out one thing, one kind of interesting phenomena, and I pointed out because it is not a singular case for Sanchi Stupa. It is quite common in Indian architecture in general, Indian religious architecture in general. That is this naked female figure, grass tree, and the tree is fruiting. You see that kind of banana-like fruit and all kind of fruit. The female features were exaggerated in terms of reproductivity, like the breasts and genital areas were highlighted. This is likely a symbol of fertility, female fertility, right? We have seen this in Neolithic age in Mesopotamia that, you know, fertility was hoped for by, you know, creating those voluptuous female figure, or, you know, using the bull's horn to represent male reproductivity. So this looks very much like that idea, and especially when there are fruits and the tree, right? So it has been baffling scholars about, you know, why they put something like that. That seems not appropriate according to modern standard for a religious sacred architecture, but it is very common, right? They appear symmetrically. That one is broken, but they appear just under the beam of this gate called Torana. I just pointed out here because we are going to see the same phenomena again and again. During the Kushan period, from the 1st century to 4th century CE, Buddhism expanded from the heartland of Ganges River to Central Asia and Sri Lanka. It's during this period. And from Central Asia, Buddhism was introduced to China in the 1st century CE and to Southeast Asia from Sri Lanka. So these are the two major diffusion of Buddhism. The northern diffusion of Buddhism spread mainly Mahayana. It's called Mahayana Buddhism. Mahayana. And the southern route mainly diffused Hinayana, the so-called Hinayana, also known as Theravada. So today in Southeast Asia, like in Thailand and Burma, they mostly practice Hinayana or Theravada. And in China, India, Japan, Japan, and Korea, it's mainly Mahayana. There is also a trans-Himalaya diffusion of Buddhism for which Buddhism was introduced to Tibet directly, and that is called the Vajrayana. Vajrayana. It is in Mahayana Buddhism, for the first time, a Buddhist statue was created. While originally Buddhism did not worship icon, they just worship relics, they worship symbols, like the tree represent enlightenment, footprint representing the hermetic practice, etc. and etc. Or a stupa represent Nirvana, represent final enlightenment. But when Buddhism was introduced into Central Asia, into a region called the Bactria region, when in the 1st century it was ruled by a Greek governor left by Alexander the Great and their descendants, where the creation of God's image in the human form was quite normal, it is there the first statue for Buddha was discovered. So scholars in general agree that it is the combination of Greek idea of making God human and the Buddhist idea of the enlightened one that created the first Buddhist icon, the Buddhist statue, the human image of Buddha. And so that is from there, now the familiar Buddha image spread, all over Asia. So Kushan dynasty, we will look at one monument, that is a Chaitia Hall. While at the Sanchi, no Chaitia Hall survived, only the platform survived, no structure survived. But at Karli, a 2nd century rock cut Chaitia had survived. And it is carved into the rock, but mimicking wooden structure. So by looking at this rock cut temple, we get a very good sense of the spatial arrangement of Chaitia Hall that used to stand on ground. It has a nave, right? 2 aisles, an apse, a stupa, and that allows circumambulation. And the aisle is also connected with the apse that also allows circumambulation. And then there is a kind of a narthex with columns. So all these looks really familiar. It looks just like an early Christian architecture. Looks also just like the idea of basilica, right? But of course, this is from 2nd century. It's earlier than any early Christian architecture. Christianity was still underground when this Chaitia Hall was created. So if there are connections, then who came first? It's a question, right? It's a big question there. But the similarity is quite astonishing. And when the British archaeologists came to survey these ancient monuments, they use Christian term to name different parts. So they call this narthex, they call this nave, and they call that aisles, and they call this apse, right? Of course, these are our term. This is not the original Indian term 2,000 years ago. So the same kind of fertility symbol appeared also at the entrance. So these images appeared on that screen, just facing the entrance. Just like entering the Sanchi Stupa, the first thing you see above is that naked female figure. And here, what you are looking before you enter this sacred space for religion are these almost naked couples, a smiling face, and then those fertility features are emphasized. So it's quite normal. So after looking at more and more phenomena like this, the original question we tended to ask, why do they have these naked body in religious sacred architecture become fainter and fainter? And because the very reason why we ask why is because we think it is unusual or it is not normal. If it is normal according to the standard of the civilization, then the question is going to be, why not? So, so there are certainly factual aspect of these art and architectural historical issue, and there are the interpretation, and the interpretation part is always tied with our own mentality, our own current problem, and our own current situation. I think that's something I want you to be aware. So when you ask a question, when you reflect on something, be self-reflective and also be critical to historical material as well as to our own attitude. So the interior shows the high ceiling of the nave and the aisles, and this human figure gives you a sense of scale. The stupa looks very similar to Sanchi stupa, although this one is not a building, it's a carving. It's carved out from the live rock. 3 railings, lower 2 circular, upper 1 square, an axis, umbrellas, right? So it looks just like the Sanchi stupa. So it was a very common way of building stupa back in the Maurya and Kushan period. Now the Kushan period was like the Indian Age of Disunion, where the country was divided into many smaller kingdoms, and Kushan occupied the northern part, and in the middle there's an Andhra kingdom, etc. But then in 320, the Indian subcontinent was unified again under the Gupta dynasty. So once again, the north and south became unified, and the capital city was restored at Patna or Pataliputra. And it is during this period, the so-called international Gupta style in Buddhist art was created. And this is like the period of standardization when the image of Buddha and Bodhisattva were standardized and exported all over the world. So we see Buddha image throughout the world looks kind of similar. That is because of the universal success of Gupta art from the 4th century to the 6th century. All right, we will look at one example from the Gupta period, and that is the Ajanta. Ajanta also belonged to a series of rock-cut tradition throughout Asia. Temples were created on the mountainside for Buddhist practice. And later, these were also introduced to China, to Central Asia, and to Korea. So the rock-cut temple were created along a vertical surface of a cliff surrounding a river valley. The caves were carved from 2nd century BCE to 6th century CE. The earliest one came from came from the 2nd century BCE. But the grandest ones were mostly from around 500, from the later period. And these rock-cut temples also mimic wooden structure. So by looking at these rock-cut facade, we can also try to imagine what the actual wooden construction might look like back then. So a river and the mountainside with these rock-cut temples. And we find, for example, the Chaitia Hall, right? With the nave and side aisles and the apse here. You know, Chaitia, right? Another Chaitia. Chaitia Hall has stupa inside. They all have stupa inside. And the rest of them are vihara, right? The viharas. Vihara, now there is no real open air courtyard, but still there is a large central space and then surrounding areas divided into smaller rooms for individual practitioner. This is a Chaitia Hall. And the teardrop-shaped window is known as Chaitia window. It was meant to mimic a leaf of the Bodhi tree under which Buddha achieved enlightenment. So for the construction of these rock-cut temple, this big window was used for extracting the cut stone, right? So you work from top to bottom. You first, the creation of this rock cut architecture was the opposite. It's not built from bottom up. It's carved from top to top down. You first carve the ceiling part and work gradually down. So that big window is also used to extract those blocks. And the facade shows timber construction with columns and the windows, the balcony, right? So presumably wooden architecture standing used to look like that. And this is cave number 26 from Ajanta and from the 6th to 7th century. It has the kind of a similar tall ceiling for the nave and side aisles, and a stupa at the apse area. But compared with the earlier Kardi, we notice now there are Buddha statue. So Buddha statue didn't become a norm until after the Kushan period. So earlier ones does not have Buddha statue. Later one had Buddha statue. So this is a vihara, right? Rock cut, but then the central courtyard is mimicked. And also the peristyle courtyard, columns circulating the entire courtyard from all four sides, which would be referred to as peristyle in the Greco-Roman tradition. And whether or not these two are related, there's a question mark. Chances are they are related. They know about each other. And so for these vihara, the dorms, there's a small shrine in the back where collective worship could be done. And there's a statue of Buddha. Now, the center for worship is no longer relics structure of stupa anymore. In this vihara, it is the image, it is the icon. So icon worship eventually replaced the relics worship as the central activity of a Buddhist monastery. And this is the case in India, and this is also the case in China and Japan. So basically, earlier monasteries were more associated with relics worshiping, the late ones more centered with the worshipping of a statue. And those statues are considered eventually as having the same magical power as the relics. Now, let's move on to take a look at a Southeast Asian example of Buddhist architecture, and that is the famous monument of Borobudur in Indonesia. So Buddhism spread from India all over Asia, reaching as far as the Indonesian Isles and as far as Japan in that direction, right? So by the 13th century, Buddhism almost disappears in India. Became the major religion, as well as Islam. Islam basically invading from northwest, and Hinduism recovered together the kind of squeeze Buddhism out of India. So today, there's no significant Buddhist population in India anymore, but that population exists in China, Japan, and Korea, and Tibet, of course. So Borobudur, constructed in a period between 760 to 830 CE. It was built on a natural hill. The base is relatively a square. It's quite accurate given the surveying scale of the ancient time. Not every culture is as accurate as the Egyptians. So 122 meters by 116 meters is quite accurate, a square, given the scale, the large scale. The plan was based on the mandala with a cosmic axis. What is a mandala? Mandala is the cosmic model, right? And the Buddhist cosmology was expressed in mandala. It features a concentric design, highlighting a central axis representing the axis of the universe, the Mount Meru. And then there are many layers, and those layers represent those different layers belonging to the three realms. And interestingly, here at Borobudur, we can find three groups of layers. The top groups are circular. So this is the upper realm. The middle realm are square and having this middle protrusion, creating that complicated polygonal shape. This is the middle realm. And then there's a lower base, lower base elevated from the common ground. So could be understood as the realm division, and each realm also had subdivisions of different layers. And according to Buddhism, beings of different degrees of enlightenment reside on different layers. Those ones living on the upper layers, they were closest to the enlightened status, while those lower ones were suffering more the consequence of reincarnation, going through all those misery of life and death, including human being. So human being reside on lower layers, together with animal and Below us there are world for hungry ghost and also the Buddhist hells. So it's can be understood as a cosmological model expressed in the universal cosmic diagram of a mandala. So from this plan, you can also see the three grouping, first group, second group, the third group. And from the section, you might notice that it is also a hemispherical shape. Kind of like the Sanchi Stupa, or sophisticated version of it. The three realm division was more in detail, and there were more sculptural embellishment on every level. But the basic idea is still pretty much like the stupa. So Borobudur is basically a stupa, but with more explicit expression of the cosmic model. So this is the mandala, and today the most famous mandala is from the Tibetan world. In Tibetan Buddhism, mandala represent a field, both physical and spiritual, and it represents the essence of a deity, a place into which a deity descends. So there were a different world, and each world was ruled by a Buddha or Bodhisattva, and that image of that Buddha is usually inscribed in the very middle, but it's also represent the world with that specific deity as the lord of that world. So it's also a universal diagram, and the architectural character of that Tibetan mandala is also unmistakable. You can see the square and circle, those gate-like structure, and the layered structure focusing a center. Right? So this is like a two-dimensional diagram of the universe. But Tibetan mandala has many layers of meanings, more sophisticated, but they were based on the same cosmic idea about how the universe is structured. So Borobudur can be considered as a three-dimensional pedagogical process. One learns the different stages of attaining Bodhi. Bodhi means enlightenment, the perfect wisdom. Upon circumambulating and ascending the four rectangular galleries, the three circular terraces, culminating in the stupa on the top. So there is a stupa at the summit, right? Representing the axis. So the ritual performed here is also the same as Sanchi Stupa. So you basically circumambulate clockwise. But here you can circumambulate it on many different levels. So that procedure is like the procedure of climbing up the ladder of beings, getting closer and closer to the enlightened situation and accumulating wisdom. And so Borobudur can also be imagined as a giant machine for enlightenment. By circumambulating different level and eventually end up at the top, the numerous sacred images and Buddha statues were meant to help you to achieve that enlightened mind. So in terms of the sculptural scheme on different levels of Borobudur, the lower ones had more figurative carving illustrating Buddhist stories, but then on the upper realm, all statues were hidden inside small stupa, and they are just a statue without narrative story anymore. So the lower ones still had that narrative ones, kind of more material, more secular, but the higher you reach, the more abstract abstract it become, until on the very top, you find just a stupa, but inside the stupa, there is a statue. But originally, as originally constructed, you were not meant to see that statue, because that statue is hidden inside that stupa. This one, you got to see the statue. So why did they take so much time and effort to create those statues and put them hidden inside the stupa? That is because they believe the magical power of that. They believe the power of these Buddha statue would help whoever is circumambulating, taking the effort to climb up all those layers, to help you to achieve that, get closer to that, to Nirvana, to that, enlightened status. Yeah, that's, notice, just point out here, the upper levels are all just a stupa, but inside each stupa, there is a Buddha statue. And then the axis itself is a bigger stupa. Now, okay, I think we can stop here.